Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Yale Climate Week. My name is Dr. Christine Rodriguez, and I serve as an assistant professor and the associate dean of Office of Nursing and Faculty at Yale School of Nursing. And in today's session, which I'm really delighted to share with you all, we will be exploring imagining a healthier planet, the power of creative expression and collective healing, which will focus on the importance of centering consciousness, the arts, and healthcare through a planetary health lens. And it's really kind of timely, right? Planetary Health Alliance 10-year celebration. So it's really just beautiful highlighting what this looks like. I'm delighted to introduce you to today's wonderful panelists who are beloved colleagues, and you'll learn a little bit more when I talk about their bios. But they will describe how the intersections of artistic expression, visual art, music, storytelling, mindfulness, and consciousness are used to process experiences and drive social change. So today's discussion is going to showcase that synergistic power of healthcare, right? We're going to look at research, creative expression to explore storytelling, emotional engagement, cultural sensitive advocacy, and overall climate resilience and planetary health, right? So each of today's panelists that you will hear from will have about 15 minutes to kind of talk about their areas, what they're doing specifically in relation to planetary health and consciousness. And then I, yours truly, will moderate a session afterwards with a Q&A. So we have 3 presenters today, and we'll kind of start to begin a conversation with introducing our first panelists. I want to make sure to remember
Susan at AZA. Susan's going first.
Susan. All right, Susan. So we'll talk a little bit about Susan's work. So Dr. Susan Prescott, pediatrician, immunologist, and an internationally acclaimed physician scientist, well known for her cutting-edge research into early environmental determinants of health and disease. Globally, she is recognized for her work on the interconnections between human health and planetary health, promoting mutualistic value systems for both ecological and social justice. She is also the director of Nova Network, which is a transdisciplinary global community providing evidence, inspiration, and advocacy for the health and flourishing of all people, places, and planet. In addition to over 300 scientific publications, she is also an artist, which you will see beautiful visual displays, and an award-winning author of several books. In Finding Common Ground, she maintains that we can work together to address many global problems, recognizing the direct connection between personal and planetary health. Her passion for this exudes, as you will hear shortly in her presentation titled, Seeding a New Story, Inspiring Planetary Consciousness for Personal and Collective Transformation. So without further ado, I introduce you to Dr. Susan Prescott.
Thank you so much. Well, it really is a real honor to be here with you all. And I want to just begin with my gratitude.
Are there microphones?
I'm trying to speak loudly, but I'll keep, is it okay?
A microphone would be handy.
But I'm really grateful. I'll try and yell.
Like to hear.
For the opportunity to, and the vision behind this session. It really does speak directly to the heart of meaningful change, because no matter how many technical solutions we develop, they really won't truly serve us or the planet unless we apply them through more evolved worldviews, rooted in compassion, connection, and care. So I also want to thank you for inviting me to share my art as I talk about my work in planetary health and how it connects to the deeper need for spiritual and cultural transformation in addressing the complex challenges we face, both locally and globally. More about me, as you've heard, I'm a pediatrician and an immunologist, and I've worked in the health sector for over 30 years. And for the last 14 years, I've been leading a global planetary health network, exploring the ecological relationships across all systems at all scales, from the foundational microbes, which are vital to all ecosystems, to the complex web of life that collectively contribute to the health of planetary systems. It also includes our social and cultural ecology, our spirituality, worldviews, and values that define and shape our relationships with nature, with others, and with our own inner capacities. As an artist, a central part of my work is weaving creativity into this broader agenda, inviting inspirational narratives that unite intellectual insight with heart-centered understanding for meaningful change. And I'll talk more about this in a moment. Like many others here, this is my life, not just my career. I do this for the sheer joy of wanting to connect to the universe around me and within me and to make a real difference. I work transnationally as a Professor of Planetary Health at the University of Western Australia and as Director of the Centre for Planetary Consciousness and Global Flourishing at the Nova Institute here in the United States, where we weave together systems, science, spirituality, creativity, and community into a transdisciplinary approach to healing our relationships within ourselves, across communities, and with the living earth. Today, I want to share a vision of planetary health that goes beyond overcoming threats to our biophysical planetary boundaries to include the toxic, social, economic, political, and spiritual climates fueling our global challenges. Addressing these challenges ultimately requires a profound shift in consciousness, a transformation in our values and worldviews that reaches the deeper underlying root causes like any healing process. There's no longer any question that human disruptions to natural systems are harming all life on Earth, including our own. Rising disease, despair, and disconnection are inextricably linked to the degradation of ecosystems, both environmental and societal. Our physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being is inseparable from the health of our societies and our attitudes towards nature. Over decades, my own research as a paediatrician has focused on how physical and emotional ecology affect our lifelong health. And as an immunologist, how large-scale adversity promotes inflammation at the cellular level as a major driver of the modern health crisis. And that's why we need transgenerational approaches to health at all scales and deep structural changes in how we live. In most societies, we've seen a steady shift towards a culture of competition, one that fractures communities and promotes a worldview rooted in materialism, extraction, and consumerism. This worldview prioritizes extrinsic goals like wealth, power, fame, and status at the expense of more meaningful intrinsic life goals, such as personal growth, love, learning, care. Our current culture tends to elevate domination over collaboration, certainty over creativity, and reductionism over spirituality and love. It has been linked to rising trends in narcissism, greed, antisocial behaviour, social fragmentation, and inequality, undermining both our physical and mental health. In this environment, territorialism and conflict are rewarded, and the dark triad characteristic traits such as narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy are often overrepresented in politics, corporation, and social media, reinforcing harmful norms and systemic injustices. But there is a growing call to address this profound relational crisis. This disconnection from nature, one another, and from ourselves is reflected in global conflict, ecological destruction, and the erosion of social cohesion. And to evolve from a culture of competition and a culture of cooperation, we need more grounded relationships and understanding of interconnectedness. As famed environmental lawyer Gus Speth said so powerfully, the top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy, and to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. The emergent field of planetary health responds to this need. It is both transdisciplinary field and, crucially, it's a social movement committed to the well-being of all life, now and for generations to come. It's not simply another iteration of environmental health. It takes a whole of society approach that includes the wider social, commercial, and health and justice, determinants of health and justice. It also expands concept of human health from well-being to flourishing, which extends our focus from just the physical, social, and economic resources to include the value of relationships, creativity, happiness, purpose, and meaning. These principles of planetary health also echo ancestral wisdom and Indigenous knowledge systems, emphasising the inherent interconnectedness of all life. To harm the earth is to harm the self. While the field began with a really strong focus on the biophysical systems, there's a growing recognition that damage to our biosphere is inseparable to the crisis in our psychosphere. And that's why initiatives like the Earthrise community, which I lead, are working to cultivate a kind of wiser and more creative response. Earthrise is a collaboration between the Planetary Health Alliance and the Centre for Planetary Consciousness and Global Flourishing at the Nova Institute. At its core, this work is really about connecting communities, co-creating deeper narratives, and communicating them widely to shape both academic thinking and broader social movements. By bringing deeper values into mainstream conversations, we can accelerate the shift in consciousness needed for lasting change. Earthrise offers a visionary space where diverse voices and traditions can advance ethical, earth-based spirituality through scholarship, art, contemplation, and dialogue. It's rooted in deeper spiritual relationships with ourselves, with each other, and the natural world. We believe that emotional connection has greater power to inspire change than logic alone, and that meaningful sustainability cannot be achieved without peace, love, wisdom, respect, and importantly, forgiveness. Real transformation requires not only awareness, but also the skills and the desire to embody wiser, more compassionate ways of being. With that in mind, I'll briefly touch on the 5 themes that underpin Earthrise and our work more generally at the Centre for Planetary Consciousness, and the QR code is a link to a paper that we've had summarising this. Our first and central theme is co-creation and seeding new stories. Narratives shape our reality. They influence values, attitudes, and behaviours, and they have the power to shift entire systems. We are not just shaped by stories, we shape them. And yet, we don't use this power consciously or creatively enough. It's not enough to dismantle old paradigms. We must also imagine and embody new ones, stories that offer hopeful visions and tangible alternatives. Too often, energy is poured into trying to destroy the old rather than building the new, and fear-based crisis narratives are really taking a toll on mental health, especially among the young. It's really time to extend horizons, imagine what's possible, and begin living into that future now. Optimistic, mutualistic stories foster belonging, engagement, and collective action. The second theme is consciousness and inner development. Deepening self-awareness, purpose, and meaning, and cultivating emotional resources like wisdom, love, respect, and hope are qualities that we grow from within. When we are engaged with purpose, we navigate challenges better, and this is magnified in supportive environments, which is why community development is core to this work. Which brings us to our next theme, connectedness. This is a universal sense of belonging and interdependence. Through deeper relationships with each other and with nature, we can cultivate care, compassion, and coherence, because awe and wonder inspire emotional connections that guide us towards solutions aligned with life itself. Then we have convergence, inviting a rich tapestry of perspectives. We seek to weave scientific insight and spiritual wisdom informed by Indigenous and diverse ancestral cultural worldviews. In a time of fragmentation and division, we aim to create inclusive spaces that centre shared values and a sense of common purpose. And finally, imagination and creativity. This is essential for inspiring new paradigms. Art opens a space for intercultural and intergenerational understanding. It deepens narratives, strengthens emotional resonance, and bridges intellectual and heart-centred approaches. Obviously, these themes are deeply interwoven, and for us, spirituality is not peripheral but central to planetary health. By normalising the inclusion of deeper universal values in wider discussions, we can help accelerate the cultural transformation urgently needed. We, of course, are one of many groups working towards this shared purpose, and by coming together in spaces like this, we can connect our efforts, amplify our impact, and build more flourishing futures together. I've been coming to New York Climate Week for several years now, and before I close, I just want to share one of the most powerful messages I've heard here, and it's actually offered by the Yale program on climate change communication in collaboration with Potential Energy, and I'm sure many of you know it. They surveyed nearly 58,000 people from the G20 countries searching for a unifying message capable of mobilizing people for change, specifically climate action. What they found was simple yet profound. The most powerful motivator was love. Love for our children, love for our world, and the desire to protect it for future generations. This transcended culture, education, and political beliefs, and we really shouldn't be surprised that love is a universal driving force, nor should we shy away from it. It's really what we all crave. It has the power to transform everything we do. When we center our goals in love, our collaborations deeper, our actions are more meaningful and effective, and our differences can become assets. In a world where vast resources are poured into war and destruction, love and peace are perhaps the most critical elements of planetary health. So one of the most vital investments we can make for the future is nurturing emotional intelligence in our children, promoting lifelong awareness of interconnectedness, love, and reverence for nature and for each other, to build a more compassionate, responsible culture rooted in pro-social and pro-environmental values. While this may seem ambitious, small, intentional actions, especially within networks of shared purpose, can ignite ripples of systemic change. Similarly, our efforts to build critical relationships can be more effective and enduring than striving for critical mass. Coherent networks create the conditions for transformative ideas to spread and new paradigms to emerge. And in that spirit, we warmly welcome you all who would like to join us in this journey of advancing well-being for communities, individuals, and the world that we share. So please reach out to us if you would like to join us. And I would just like to end here with a personal note of joy, love, and gratitude for this opportunity to share with you all of this incredible world that we live in. None of this is new. We have always been inherently part of this universe. But by choosing to live in that awareness, in our actions, in our collaborations, in our daily lives, we can shift what is possible for our shared future. So thank you very much, and I'll leave it there.
Beautiful, Dr. Prescott, as always. It was such a pleasure just to kind of share how this came about because it was so beautiful. Dr. Pani said in the message, and was like, I have this wonderful colleague who did this tremendous artwork. And so as the artwork came to me, I was touched from my lens as an individual, seeing the lens of the connection and interconnectedness of what we're seeing with planetary health. So I just thank you for the reverence that you have for those frameworks, because it's so important to see it, and kudos for always doing that. So thank you, thank you. Awesome, y'all. So I have the pleasure of introducing our next panelist, Dr. AZA Allsop, who is a psychiatrist, neuroscientist, and a neo-fusion artist whose work bridges science, medicine, and music. His research explores social cognition, mindfulness, and psychedelics as pathways to collective healing, while his music, which is rooted in the traditions of the African diaspora, blends jazz, gospel, hip-hop, and soul. He studied biology, jazz, and philosophy at North Carolina Central University, trained in the Harvard MIT MD PhD program, and was an Emerson Scholar at Berklee College of Music. After completing psychiatric training at Yale, he became an assistant professor at both Yale and Howard University, where he serves also as the director of the Center for Collective Healing. He is also the medical director of the Rest Crisis Center and a co-founder of organizations uniting art, science, spirituality, and community building to drive social change. As a performer, he has appeared at venues including the Kennedy Center, Jazz at Lincoln Center, South by Southwest, or SXSW, and Yale Schwarzman Center. His title today is called Decoding and Modulating Collective Action, Music, Mindfulness, and Psychedelics, where he will describe his lab's research using neuroscience and computational approaches to understand the mechanisms of social behavior and how music, mindfulness, and psychedelics can shift social dynamics. This understanding is then leveraged to create tools that can treat mental health symptoms and help humans solve polarization crises and coordination challenges such as climate action. Without further ado, Dr. AZA.
Well, it's really a privilege to be here. I have a lot of ideas that I want to share, but in the interest of time, I won't be able to go as in depth in all of them. So I'm going to share a lot of information, and I welcome like more questions in the panel or follow up. Oh, oh, mercy, mercy me. Things ain't what they used to be. No, where did all the blue skies go? Poison is the wind that blows from the north and south and east. Oh, mercy, mercy me. Things ain't what they used to be. No, oil wasted on the oceans and upon our seas. Fish full of mercury. Oh, oh, mercy, mercy me. Things ain't what they used to be. Radiation on the ground, in the sky. Animals and birds who live nearby are dying. Oh, mercy, mercy me. Things ain't what they used to be. No. What about this overcrowded land? How much more abuse from man can she stand? I want to start with the land acknowledgement. Just some of the stuff I'll share is it's great that we have these resources and it came at a cost and a price, and it continues to come at a cost and a price that we have to acknowledge. And conflicts of interest with a few companies that I co-founded that work at this intersection. So the four big ideas that I'll share, like I said, will kind of really speed through things is developing tools for social connection, why that's important, how we understand the role of the brain in actually modulating social connection, how can we use that to develop new community-based therapeutics, and then how can we study and drive community-based climate action using these tools and frameworks. So obviously the social brain is important for us to have social norms and culture, and we now know that social connection is so important in the wake of COVID and sort of being in the middle of a loneliness epidemic. And basically the big picture argument that we really need social solutions to solve crises like the climate crisis, which are existential and necessary for our survival. But as a psychiatrist, as a physician, we see altered social behavior in many different scenarios. And we think that approaches have to be affordable, accessible, implementable, and community-based. And so when we look at music, it's really intrinsic to many of the sort of initial and original healing systems. And it's sort of with modernization, music became something of an art that wasn't also considered science and medicine. We know that we see music across the globe. It facilitates social behavior in all contexts that we see it in. People have done experiments, again, I won't go into detail, but people have done experiments to show that music can modulate helping behavior, even in young children. And we know that music is one of the most potent stimulators of the brain. And psychiatry, there's now a lot of evidence to show that music can, treat symptoms like anxiety and depression, hallucinations. And so coming out of residency, we started the Center for Collective Healing, which is a network of community organizations and academic institutions that are working to solve a number of big problems. We'll focus today on the work we're doing around climate and nature relatedness, coordination, and problem solving. You'll see here we collaborate with many different institutions and organizations are always looking to add more people to our collaboration networks. We take a number of different approaches. I'll focus here on two of the bigger picture ones, which is multimodal languages. So those are things like music, visual arts, dance, theater, and then alternative therapies or immersive technologies and experiences, which include things like plant medicines and psychedelics. Okay, so that's sort of, again, big picture, like why do we take this framework? I'm now going to share a specific experiment that looks at this idea of how can we better understand the ways in the brain that social connection can be modulated. So this was done at Yale in collaboration with Joy Hirsch at the Brain Function Lab. And we use a technology called functional near-infrared spectroscopy, which is similar to fMRI, where you're using infrared light instead of magnetic resonance. The limitation of it is that you only get cortical activity. The cool thing about it is that you can have people interacting in more naturalistic ways, and you can record from two people at a time. And so that's exactly what we did. I'm going to... So there's a chord progression condition and a no chord progression condition, with this idea that we had that certain kinds of music or certain kinds of chord progressions have high statistical probability in our popular music because they're actually doing something to the ways that we connect in the brain. But no one's really been able to show this. So okay, so that's the chord progression condition. This is the no chord progression condition, where we shuffle all the frequencies, we keep the rhythm the same, but there's no longer any information about a chord progression. That's what this sounds like. Okay, so some people might even like the second one. Oh my God, that's weird. But there's no chord progression information, and that's sort of the thing that we're trying to hone in on. And then we ask them, how connected do you feel to your partner? This is the basic experimental structure. Again, happy to go into more details if people want. These are our demographics. I'll kind of skip through some of this. So big picture, when people can see each other and hear this chord progression, they feel most connected, or rate their connectedness higher than in any other condition, which is going along with our hypothesis that there might be something about these chord progressions that actually modulate social behavior. So what's happening in the brain? What we saw that was really cool is that only in the condition where you have both the face, so you can actually see and interact with the person, and the chord progression, do you get activity in a specific network, which involves this area of the brain called the angular gyrus. And you also see activation of the somatosensory association cortex, which is the part of the brain that allows you to feel anything that you feel is being processed in that part of the brain. So when we say we feel connected, it's sort of a language that we use, but it's actually activating this part of the brain that is important for how we feel things. And we can modulate it with this specific chord progression. The other thing I'll say about this is that we're able to show that we can increase synchrony, which is in red, when people can see each other and have this chord progression, versus when they can see each other, but there's no chord progression, or vice versa, when they can't see each other, but there is a chord progression. And importantly, if you take two people that weren't actually interacting and you align their data to the music, you don't actually see that increase in synchrony. So it's something that's actually mediated by the real live interaction and the music, and not just the structural features of the chord progression. Okay, so big picture, a popular consonant chord progression can modulate social connection, drive neural network activation and synchrony when people can actually see each other and interact. The angular gyrus seems to be like a very specific hub for this. As an aside, it's also an area of the brain that's hypoactive in a few different mental health conditions, including autism spectrum disorder. So there might be a way to like specifically activate this in a way that might bridge social connection. And we see neural synchrony in somatosensory areas of the brain. And that might be the mechanism by which people actually feel more connected when they listen to music. So can certain chords synchronize groups and facilitate shared mental models that can drive collective action? I think is an open question, but it's one that we're looking to figure out. Okay, so now I'm getting more into like how do we apply this in some community-based way? And so again, we know that both music and mindfulness can modulate mood. It can be helpful in a number of different therapeutic contexts. And we know that mindfulness actually can modulate specific parts of the brain that are important for the things we care about in mental health and psychiatry, like mood regulation, arousal, interoception, and things like that. There are now meta-analyses that show that these things can be effective, but as you can see, they're also variable. Some forms of these protocols do better than others, and we're still trying to figure out exactly, why that is. So in this study, we partnered with the New Haven Symphony Orchestra and the Bloom Community Center to see how could a music mindfulness intervention modulate physiology and other features of psyche while individuals are in a community-based setting with each other. And we're measuring EEG data and heart rate data. This was also a bilingual study, which we were really, excited about. So this just gives you an idea of Bloom, the space, our audio setup. And now I'm going to play sort of a section for this. Feel free to drop in and follow it if you want to, or just kind of observe. But this gives you a sense of what the participants experience.
Begin to As you breathe in and notice how the breath lifts. And as you breathe out, notice how the belly softens and releases. See if you can just keep the focus of your awareness right here.
So I'll pause it because the echo is not going to really allow you to hear, but the big picture is there's a facilitator, there's a live musician, and they're playing over this backing track. So I'll skip over some of these. The big thing here is that there were two different kinds of meditation, music mindfulness exercises that people did. One that was for focus and one that was for motivation, and it was counterbalanced for tempo order. The big picture here is that we can modulate heart rate variability, which is a marker for stress, anxiety. It is altered in many different psychiatric conditions. We can alter it within just 10 minutes of individuals doing this, this activity. And we can also alter EEG activity. The places on the head where you see red means more activity in that part of the brain during these different conditions. But more importantly, we show that we can decrease stress acutely. So if you look at before they did the session versus after, we can also modulate their state mindfulness and enhance it during this experience. And they do have enhanced altered states of consciousness during this experience. Importantly, they also rate themselves as being more socially connected after this. Interestingly, this only happens in person. So we had another group of individuals doing the same thing, but virtually. And while they also had decreases in stress, increases in mindfulness, they did not have an increased sense of social connection, even though they were like in a group chat and things like that. So again, we know that music mindfulness in the community can activate parasympathetic and sympathetic activity in the brain and body and frontotemporal regions of the brain. It can improve social connection, improve stress and mindfulness, and this may be an effective community-based treatment. And we're following up on that as well. In the interest of time, I won't go through all the details of this, but this is another community-based model of music treatment that we're looking at, which is the community drum circles. Drum circles have such a historical role in just communication and culture. And there have already been a number of different studies that show that it can sort of bolster different social features and social dynamics in connection in community. So we developed a specific protocol for a drum circle and implemented it both in New Haven and in Washington, D.C. This example of actually the last Washington, D.C. drum circle you have is a very inclusive space, and you get people from a very broad demographic. We can see that there are parts of the drum circle that are synchronous, where people are very in sync with each other, and parts that are not. And if you take those recordings and you play them to a new group of people who weren't involved and ask them to judge which parts are synchronous and which parts are asynchronous, they do much better at being able to guess the synchronous parts. And if you ask them to rate their perceived connection, the parts of the drum circle that have high synchrony, which we quantify statistically, they also perceive that to be the more connected part of the drum circle. So there's this link between synchrony that we can measure in something like a drum circle and people's sense of connection. So the last thing I'll share is about the work that we're doing to actually study how to drive community-based climate action. One of these contexts is in coordination with Beckley Retreats, who has a group-based legal psilocybin retreats in both Jamaica and the Netherlands. It's 4 weeks of preparation, then 6 days on site where they have 2 psychedelic, in this case, psilocybin ceremonies with integration, and then 6 weeks of integration after that. I'll talk to you a little bit about just the work that we're doing. We collected data during that one week where they're on site in Jamaica as a sort of protocol, a proof of concept feasibility study. And we looked at a number of different measurements, sort of pre this ceremony and then after the first ceremony and after the second ceremony. We developed this way of measuring social dynamics in a group called the social perception assessment. What it allows each person in the group, so here, let's say this is a group of 8, each person is a leaded circle. They are able to rate, there's a number of different questions about the individual that they're paired against. They don't get to actually speak, but they're just judging based on their initial perception. And then you have multiple rounds where basically everyone is going to be paired with everyone else and get to rate. And these are the questions that they answer on a Likert scale. How connected do you feel to this person? How approachable? How familiar are they? And from that, we can get a social perception score. So what I'm just showing you here is in these individuals who were doing this group psilocybin retreat, when you look at their pre-scores compared to their post-scores, you can see that there's really an enhanced social perception. The more red these lines are, the higher the perception. The other thing that we did was look at their nature relatedness score, which is something that we also think psychedelics can modulate. And you can see that many of the individuals are already coming in with a high nature relatedness score, which is probably why they might even want to do a psilocybin retreat in Jamaica. But for individuals who come in with a lower score, you can see that after we are able to see that they have a raised nature relatedness score. This is just an example of another network group here and the facilitation. The other thing that we saw is that by the end of the second ceremony, the correlation between their ratings of each other is significantly higher and more correlated than in the beginning. And their levels of distress are much lower. We're also working with Leora Roseman to look at the impact of psychedelic retreat in the context specifically for people who want to be engaged in climate action and be nodes for improved action. And so in this context, they have many trainings before both a psilocybin and ayahuasca experience, and then integration, but it's all geared around climate. We started to already look at some of this work for Israelis and Palestinians that are coming together to do ayahuasca ceremonies. And some of the themes that we see are related to this idea of a feminine energy and safe space, which, it all often kind of harps this idea of Mother Earth and the Earth as sort of a feminine character. And these ideas of connectedness, music, and dance emerge from that. And we're using this sort of LLM-based form of thematic analysis to analyze now that data from the cohort that went through the rewilding climate exercise. So I'm going to pause or kind of go to the end here so that we have enough time in the panel discussion. But this is another tool that we're building to essentially combine what we know about climate action and climate data with what we know from social neuroscience and some of the data that we're getting in the lab to come up with new community-based protocols that can drive community action. And then we can sort of test those things, get the evidence, and feed it back into the model. And so I'll end there and kind of give us time to go into the panel. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. AZA, for guiding us through this journey. It's so beautiful to see the amplification of healthcare, right? Planetary health, the humanities all kind of merging together. At this time, I'm going to have you all kind of gather together. That last question, there was a lot for you all to dig in, but feel free, if there's a question that needs to be directed to someone, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to moderate and make sure it is. If it's more of a general question, you can just put it as a general question, and I'll make sure both our panelists are able to answer it accordingly. One thing I will ask, if you all can just stand and introduce yourselves so we know who you are, and that would be really helpful. That way we can connect locations, regions, geographies, etc. So with this being said, happy to kind of start the questions. If anyone wants to start any questions for Dr. AZA or Dr. Prescott in relation to the presentations and their work.
Hi, before
And where are you from?
a question, I'm Dr. Holly Shaw. I represent the International Council of Nurses here at the UN, which has become a very sad and depressing place. And I'm a trauma specialist working a lot in the Middle East and also with former child soldiers in Uganda and other countries in Africa. I was a student in 1960. I'm probably the oldest one here, which my grandson often reminds me. In 1965 of Howard Zinn. I'm on the board of Gene Watson's Caring Science Institute. And I don't know if you could tell, but I've fallen in love with you. And because this is the solution that we're yearning for, is to be connected. And I've been involved with the United Nations in nursing, bringing a nursing voice to the UN, because nurses can do this. This is our area of expertise. And every time I go into the building for maybe 20 years, twice a week for briefings and everything, my heart explodes rereading the charter, except for the last year or so. It's so sad. And I'm the mother of a blues musician. So music is very much a part of my environment. So I just wonder if you could talk a little more about how we can, I mean, I could just listen to both of you all day. Maybe I'll find a way to do that, but how we can integrate more these concepts, especially into health and health sciences in a way that really does promote health. I love to hear the word flourishing. I'm an old student of Marty Sullivan. And we can do that. And nurses, especially, I'm sure we're not all nurses, but we can take this information and translate it into application. So I wonder if you could just expound a little bit on how we can bring this locally and also globally into our professional network and other areas. So keep talking.
I will say, 'cause I think it's such a wonderful thing you just got. Same panelists will be on October 9th and will actually do 45 minutes of their research.
October 9th, where?
October 9th, and this will be at Yale West Campus Center, and we'll provide details for that too. But that'll be 45 minutes with each presenter, which will get more detailed into their work. We're more than happy to have both Dr. AZA and Dr. Prescott kind of start leading that discussion and talk about how we can integrate that.
And that's a School of Nursing.
School of
And
Nursing.
You know, the other thing is that we're having backlash in so many different ways. So words like love and caring, and those of you know, Jean Watson, you know, this is the essence of our work. There's a backlash against all of that. So to be able to hear those words in one sentence with, you know, angular gyrus and neuroscience is really where we have to go. And so I'll come from New York to be there.
If you put in your email address in the sign-in sheet, we will be sure to email you the event.
So we'll start with Dr. AZA. Okay.
I think I view this in two ways. There's sort of the traditional route, which is kind of like trying to influence policymakers and physicians and those types of things, which the big argument that you often hear is that there's not enough evidence, or the evidence is too weak compared to some, like, let's say, pharmacological approaches, which is not entirely true when you look at actually the breadth of study. It's more that we cherry pick the ones that work and then use that as the evidence and ignore all the ones that don't work. So I think part of my effort in this research is to provide that evidence in a way that's grounded in neurobiology and physiology, understanding that there is also a spirituality and to some extent a psychology that can't be measured with some of these tools. But I think when it comes to policymakers and government officials and the people who make decisions about how the medical field evolve, they want to see a certain kind of evidence. And so how can we provide that? I think is one thing. The second thing is just doing grassroots connecting of academics to community organizations, which is a big part of the ethos of like the Center for Collective Healing. So when we find something that works, I don't care that it has to go to a phase 3 trial for somebody, in some position to say that this is something we can do. I can share that directly with my community partners and they can begin to institute it. In this case, we partnered with the New Haven Symphony Orchestra. They already have a network of orchestras and musicians that they can start disseminating these models and information to, and then people can start actually doing it and we collect more data in that way. But the actual tools are being placed directly into the hands of people in the community to implement it. And so I think those are the two frameworks that I'm working with and thinking about, like, how to translate a lot of the evidence that we do have or the value of these tools into like actionable.
And public health nurses could be enormously helpful in disseminating all of that information.
Yeah. And I think we need to remember that politicians, science, and policymakers, they're people too. And I think if the more conversations that we have like this and give permission to talk about things like that, because there isn't much care in healthcare, let's face it, there's not much real food in supermarkets, there's not go on. But I think that it's very important that we have evidence, but we also marry that with emotional intelligence. And I think that there are multiple layers of doing this, and that needs to start in young children, early years. And all of us, whether we're parents or not, can curate a community of care beginning in early life. And I think we underestimate the power of that. Children are naturally loving, kind, inquisitive, curious. And so as a pediatrician, I really think that's a very important place to start, but it's never too late. So I think that in the classrooms, through school, in universities, particularly, and in healthcare, I mean, it can be a very uncaring environment. I know many of you work in an environment where it's really, I mean, there's so much stress. And I think that's where, we also have to put our own oxygen masks on first. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to be the best that we can be. We need to be loving. We need to be kind. And that has a ripple effect. And I think that, I deal with a lot of different groups, and there's a lot of mushrooming communities that are evolving because they are hungry for something with more meaning, more purpose, and connection, meaningful connection. So we can talk about all the theory of how everything is interconnected, which is really, that has been such a progress. And Planetary Health has been a great way to really promote that concept of interconnectedness, interbeing, interdependence. But there has to be an emotional awareness of that interconnectedness, which, is what your work is showing so beautifully. And I know many of you are working in that space. So I would just say that in connection and connection, we need to connect our own heart with our own mind and treat each other in that way and bring our whole selves to a situation, not just this bit.
It's a beautiful said. I think it's so interesting when we talk to, I see questions too, the inquisitive nature, right, of the curiosity of the child. And it reminds me of my child when I had asked him, what do you want to eat? And a question so simple demands one answer, but it wasn't an or. They said, I want the chicken and the hamburger. Which kind of speaks to the inquisitive nature of a child. You don't have to make an or. I can choose what I want to choose, right? So beautiful, talking about that EQ, that cultural intelligence, emotional intelligence piece. This hand first, couple hands too, so I want to make sure we get all hands. Go ahead, here.
I have so many thoughts. So some of the thoughts. So my name is Nellie with a K, Nellie Visram. I'm originally from the islands. That was like something that touched me. I am a lifelong meditator, and I actually learned these practices when I was a child. And later on in life, founded an organization, education. We're members of the community that Dr. Prescott was talking about. So we do a lot of work with music, mindfulness, expressive art with youth around, like, sometimes online, sometimes in person, and part of our mission are to build these communities of care in these multifaceted ways. The thing that I have so much admiration for both of you. Well, I know Dr. Prescott really well, but I'm going to direct this to you. Is just it's a gap that we're experiencing in terms of so we've been trying to tell the story through short films and through, like, we're also accredited to the UN, so we actually do these circles in the UN. We've managed to create like a well-being community, like in the church center next door, so they can come over, and so when I say we, it's not just my organization, we're doing things. So we're doing the experiences, because if we talk about it, we get involved. So we're doing the experiences and not the explanations. And then they have an experience and they have this great idea, like it's their idea, right? Like, oh, wow, we should. And so that's how we're kind of infiltrating that space. But at the community level, we have a lot of data, but we don't, like, and I don't know what the answer is. I think partnering with universities is even tough, because then they want to control what it is you're doing and shape what you're doing. And so we're in this space of how can we bring the work that we're doing and be able to, what you just did, which is to really quantify it. Do I need to get a PhD? Like, what is it that I need to do? So that more of us, and we're not the only ones, there's so many people doing what you've described and having so many amazing results on the ground, but there's this gap of being able to even have the access to communicate it. One, because, oh, it's not science based. And even if you do the science, if it's like soft science, it doesn't count. Or we just don't have access, even when we have access.
Yeah. No,
So I would like to follow you and like be wherever you are.
I think so. One of the things that we did at the Center for Collective Healing is that we got our own IRB that is separate from an institution. And what it allows us to do is to set the parameters in terms for like how someone can get on that IRB, for instance. So we've made it very, very easy and accessible for members of community organizations to get on that IRB so that they can be empowered to do the research. And we have like many different tools and things that we can share. So I'm happy to follow up on ways to collaborate or ways to kind of empower people who are doing the work to collect the evidence in whatever way they feel like is important for the mission. I'll say the other thing I will say towards that is because we work in this space where we're really trying to study and collect evidence in real world settings, but have enough control where we can say something that is meaningful to the scientific community with some level of rigor. I would say there is always a trade-off. The more science that I integrate or introduce into an experience that is in the community, the more I'm changing the very thing I'm studying. And so that's a conversation I'm always like having with people in terms of like how much do we want to bring science to this, with the understanding that the more we bring, the more we're actually changing the thing.
Well, and one last thing, what we're finding is that we're changing the way science is sciencing.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
we do a lot of participatory research and we actually have and we do like a lot of nature center, everything that was shared. We're doing this and we're finding the results and it's amazing. But the modalities we're using, it's also a fight of this is valid. So we're also challenging the scientific community at the same time.
Yeah.
So to be continued.
The science needs to evolve. It's still in a Newtonian age where it needs to become a lot more quantum and understand that things are perhaps not the way it's assumed. It's kind of almost a dogma in a way. It excludes things, experiential understanding and knowledge, for example. And many of the ancient systems and indigenous wisdom is not considered science, but it should be. So
I want to make sure order who was first.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, I came in late and I will hear the first part on the recording. My name is Christina. I'm a Yale alum undergrad. I live in Italy. I'm involved with YSL and I incarnate EcoStress in the sense that I was very frontline reporting eco solutions for 15 years with millions of viewers every week and pushing the boundaries and getting a sense of, though when you're on television, you kind of get a sense of, through internet of feedback, but you're talking into a void. But then there was a lot of a very interesting feedback loop. So it really seemed like we were gaining the momentum. Then I think around 2016, 2017, which would be an interesting question to kind of, I feel that we went here. And I had in the meantime approached Professor AZA Allsop, who's a neuroscientist who discovered the mirror mechanism, because I brought to him the question, does kindness work? And we had many conversations. I wrote a book about empathic connections with others, with nature, with myself, and I wanted a scientific validation. What I did, though, is I pushed my empathic drive so far that I entered a resonance that I could not undo. So probably I should have been doing, retreats and music therapy and all the rest. But I was so running and on a mission to save the world, which, was not ego-based, but I really felt I was obsessed with hitting a tipping point. And I really felt that we had become so close. I worked with the UN for a number of years and ended up getting so disenamored with the bureaucracy that it stifles everything that's happening that that too was like, oh, yeah. So I'm in a moment where I would love to apply. Not only would I like to be following you everywhere, and not only would I like to be informed about what's happening, but I'm on the side of wanting to apply tools that can really drive hope in communities when I have pretty much lost hope, though some miracles happening. So I have had, like, after 4 years, some baby hair, all kind of now tuning into my body and what's happening and not understanding what the answers are. So my question is, have you related in any way your studies also to the empathic response to the mirror mechanism and the fact that we are wired to feel with others? And that was my quest, is can I find a way to get people to come together as well, feel together? So, I clearly missed something in the complex equilibrium, and I'm interested in knowing whether that's factored in and how I can access information, how I can be, I'm happy to be a guinea pig for your experiments.
So we haven't looked specifically at the mirror neuron mechanism, but what we are seeing is that the part of the brain that's involved in feeling is becoming synchronized in individuals when they are in certain social contexts. And particularly in this case, we're interested in the idea that certain features of music could actually drive those networks that are important for connection. I do think that there's this, and part of the thing that we're trying to understand better is like, how does actually synchronizing people's physiologies lead to some emergent properties that might facilitate the way they actually behave together? You can obviously synchronize people's motor actions in time with music, and there's a lot of sort of predictive coding that people can share in the context of music. So we're interested in how that might also facilitate shared mental models that can be leveraged to drive, specific kinds of collective action. But that feeling of connection, is clearly related to some of these changes that we're seeing in the part of the brain that we know does that.
And some of this connection that we're talking about, and I mean, we tend to we're so busy doing that we forget to come into our space of being and really focus on our own sense of deep connection. And I think that, and really encouraging that in others. And also when we look at theories of change and things like Donella Meadows' systems change, we see that the deepest levers of change are actually when we go down to the value systems and the meaning and the purpose underlying things. So if we need to have narratives that inspire people on that deeper level, running around and the usual sort of fighting in the streets. It's not necessarily the most effective way. We're learning that slowly. But also we understand that we can, with a critical mass question, trying to build that, as I said earlier, it's the really critical connections, the meaningful relationships that we develop rather than trying to influence the masses, because that's those networking of networks of shared purpose is where the power is. And that's something I'm really interested in the coming years, because I know there's some really deep, you run one, I run one, many people run these communities of change where they're really trying to take things at a deeper level. But when they connect to each other, when we can network our networks, this islands of coherence in a sea of chaos, to quote Prigozhin, Nobel Prize winner, that's when we can achieve systems change.
It's hard though. I mean, I've been insisting with the Yale community. Every meeting we have, I'm like, can't we have a web that connects all the organizations on campus that are really driving change and awareness? And so that has happened yet.
I understand exactly what you mean. And sometimes institutions are the hardest place to make change. Universities, silo, without a mechanism to connect them.
And the address yesterday is, let's break the side.
But concepts that are emerging, such as One Health, Planetary Health, whatever you want to call it, they're actually starting to really encourage people to at least be aware. It's early days, but it's happening. This concept of needing to collaborate, connect, and in a meaningful way is starting to happen. So I do have hope. And sometimes I mean, my approach has been, well, I can't do it from within the system. I'm going to stay in the system. I'm going to go over here and start creating something like over. And people go, oh, that's really interesting. And they want to come and play too. So it's like we do what we can without exhausting ourselves as well. So I think go where your heart takes you. I think we need to sort of follow our own energy to some degree. And I think the music, art, creativity, that inner, we are, you know, we have our purpose. Finding that purpose is where our wellspring is. And then things they don't need to be hard. And I think we spend so much of our energy fighting, but we take that immediate focus on changing the old is giving that's where our focus, our energy is going, rather than imagining what would be. That's where I
I know we're right at time, but I'll make sure we take that final question. So we'll wrap up with that question, but always remember, y'all, put your name on that sheet. You can have more continued discussions, more of this. You can follow our lovely panelists. They are happy to provide you contact information if needed. But thank you. Yes, go ahead.
And October 9th event will feature an art exhibit with Dr. Prescott's work. And we'll also cue Dr. AZA to have a short, I don't know what to call it, concert. That's not a concert.
It won't be a full concert. Still a few songs.
Few songs.
So there's a piano outside.
Thanks, y'all. So, good morning. My name is John Yates. I'm flexible with EM works just fine. I serve as an assistant commissioner with the New York City Department of Health in the Division of Mental Hygiene, and I too am kind of going all over the place. I think Dr. Prescott, you're really conjuring me a need to shift the paradigm shift of how we at the health department handle environmental work, because it's usually from a regulatory space rather than from a healing space. And when we tell people to go out and like get into the park and get in nature, it's usually to exercise, it's usually to lose weight, but not to be in relationship with green space, and in a city that's really hard to do. Dr. AZA, so much is coming up for me, for you, but one of the main things that came up for me is like music festivals is healing. You know, as a queer person, I've walked away from a lot of music festivals being like, wow, like there's that hope that I lost is that. And we host a lot of these, I'm thinking of kind of community, the existing kind of house music concerts and DJ groups and these community groomed activities that are just, right now they're funded from a place of like, we want to promote the arts, which yes, but this conversation invites the opportunity for us as a city to start thinking about these alternative mechanisms as actually public health interventions, right? And propping up these alternative activities, like a well-curated music festival with art, with meditation, with great music, with multi-sensory spaces and resources could really be transformative as a public health intervention.
I love what you said about integrating everything into these events. And we try in our organization and to create a mindful moment at the beginning of a meeting, and it just shifts the dynamic. I'm not suggesting, but even in your own meetings, it's like, but it's a really powerful thing. Little things like that, and nature relatedness. Love that.
I do think that this is actually a really important direction for us to evolve in terms of how we integrate the arts into our public health strategy initiative, and think about how do we fund musicians and people who have the skill and talent to be able to deliver these forms of treatment. So, you know, one of the things in that, for instance, in that collaboration with the New Haven Symphony Orchestra, these are all individuals who have moderate to high anxiety and depression symptoms with a clinically kind of administered scale. And when we look at their subjective distress, which is built around sort of the main things that lead to people having psychiatric hospitalization, we can show that just going to one of these sessions acutely decreases that to a significant level. And so I think that's the kind of evidence that shows, you know, you can have someone who's on the brink maybe or starting to get to a place where they might need something like hospitalization, and having these kinds of exposures could actually meaningfully like reduce that, right? Which I think for companies like insurance companies, those are the kinds of things that I think they value. But I totally agree that I think one of the big strategies is to ask how can we integrate these into like our public health strategy. And there's, I think, a lot of good ideas and a lot of good models for how to do that.
That will wrap our session, you all. If you want to continue to connect with our panelists, our beloved colleagues, feel free to chat with them. And of course, the October 9th event, make sure you sign your name, that we continue these dialogues together. But thank you all for attending this session. Really grateful to see you all. I'm looking forward to imagining a healthier planet. Right?